on 2GB Sydney, 4BC Brisbane and network stations across Australia. It's time for Nights with John Stanley.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Here we are. It is a Wednesday night. 131873 is the number. Lines are open if you want to have your say. There's plenty around today. There's things happening everywhere. And I think if you were to think, all right, let's find a way to express our government's response to the pandemic, particularly over the last few weeks, musically, you'd be doing it this way. This is what you'd get. There it is. All over the shop. All over the place it is. And we've got, as I said last night, you've got 7 governments, 6 states, 1 federal government. You've got a couple of territory governments added in. You've got all these different chief health officers with different views. You've got people getting conflicting advice all over the place. And as if to continue that theme, the New South Wales government, we know a lot of this drama in the New South Wales government, where specifically we've got a whole range of ministers who are in isolation at the moment. And they're including the Deputy Premier, because of what happened last Tuesday, where there was a National Party dinner and there was a minister who tested positive, and anyone who was near that minister, in the vicinity of that minister, even speaking to him for a couple of minutes, that person classified as a close contact into isolation. You've got the police minister in isolation. The Deputy Premier's in isolation. There's a range of ministers in isolation, and MPs and their staff. But lo and behold, Victor Dominello, he was one of the ministers in isolation. He's turned up at a news conference today. And he's stood next to Gladys Berejiklian, and there are ministers all over the place. What's going on here? I thought he was a close contact. And he explained, well, actually, I was classified as a close contact, but after some consideration, the health department has decided I'm not a close contact. I can leave isolation. And John Barilaro, well, he's been prepared to go public on it and say, hang on, I'm stuck here for a couple of weeks. My contact with Adam Marshall was the same as this fellow's. How come he's out? And it sounded like a bit of bleating from John Barilaro, yet in the last half hour, New South Wales health advisors had provided incorrect advice to the minister in relation to his exposure. They've apologised for him. He left isolation after receiving a negative test. He was classified as a casual contact, but late this afternoon we contacted him to advise he's still a close contact. He's re-entered isolation. An urgent COVID-19 test was performed. The test returned a negative result. He's back in isolation until July 6. So, they say his 2 negative test results mean he's not posed a risk to the community or those he's interacted with in recent days. What does all this do? It just undermines people's confidence in what they're hearing from the people who are supposed to be leading us. 10 minutes past 8 is the time. 131873 is the number. There's a lot to get across this evening. Rita Panahi joins us as she does every Wednesday night. Rita, good evening to you. Oh, you there?
Oh, my goodness, John.
What about
I don't
that?
know what country I'm living in. I am in a state of just... What are we dealing with? The Chief Health Officer in Queensland, I could not believe some of the statements she made today. And I've just been looking at some of the commentary of the Chief Health Officer in South Australia. Are they competing to out-clown each other? I mean, I am beyond words. I don't know what country we're living in and how we have handed over so much control of our lives, our liberties, to these health bureaucrats whose judgment and knowledge, I think, is right to be questioned. I think we've got to stop blindly following whatever they say without saying, well, wait a second, what about this health expert with credentials far more impressive than yours who says this? Or what about the Chief Health Officer in South Australia today was asked the most simplest question and she couldn't answer it. In fact, she got quite hostile and picked a fight with the journalist Chris Kenny rather than actually answer a simple question about vaccine targets and the risk COVID poses to young people and those who are healthy.
Yeah. Just give us a call if you want to talk about this. 131873 is the number. Rita, you sound very frustrated. Could I just mention just 2 things? I just want to play, because what Jeanette Young said earlier today, it's been talked about for much of the day. This is about AstraZeneca and the under 40s, and the numbers, the key numbers here. The risk of the blood clot at worst is 0.0003%, and then it can be very dangerous and potentially lethal. Of that 0.0003%, 3% of that 0.003. So that's how minuscule it is. Having said that, I've said this a couple of times, Rita, go to your newsagents over the next 24 hours and see the people queuing up to buy tickets in the $60 million Powerball. The odds of winning that are a lot longer than getting a blood clot, so people are thinking, well, I could win that. So maybe that's the thinking. Well, it could be me. I don't know. But this is what Jeanette Young had to say, because and there are doctors everywhere who are saying, well, it's a minuscule risk. Young people are going out and getting the AstraZeneca. But this is what the Chief Health Officer in Queensland had to say.
No, I do not want under 40s to get AstraZeneca. Why? Because they are at increased risk of getting they're rare, it is rare, but they're at increased risk of getting that rare clotting syndrome. We've seen up to 49 deaths in the UK from that syndrome. I don't want an 18-year-old in Queensland dying from a clotting illness who, if they got COVID, probably wouldn't die. We've had very few deaths due to COVID-19.
Yeah, look, the situation in the UK, you'd be aware of this, Rita. Tens of millions of people have had the AstraZeneca vaccine. About a month ago in the UK, they said that the younger people would be offered alternative vaccines because they've got them there. But then they said as the Delta thing picked up, well, and they're still saying young people, in the same way here, with informed consent, can have the AstraZeneca, which, of course, is the vaccine developed by the woman who was at Centre Court at Wimbledon getting a standing ovation, because the view in the UK is that it's what's getting them out of the mess. But I want you to hear, this is Anastasia Palaszczuk. This is just about half an hour ago on the 7:30 report, talking about this very issue. Now, I might have thought as the Premier, she might have said, well, listen, that was a bit over the top from Jeanette Young. This is what she had to say.
Let's go back to the original. AstraZeneca was manufactured by Oxford AstraZeneca in the United Kingdom, and now they're not offering AstraZeneca to their under 40s. In the UK, they've had some 49 deaths, is my understanding. So this is the data I'm very concerned about, and I think all Australians should be concerned about it. And the advice has not
They are
changed.
still offering it to them. I had a look. They're offering them an alternative because they've got it there. So, Rita,
that's twice now she is completely misled about what's happening in the UK and under 40s and AstraZeneca twice. So she had an opportunity with that interview you just played to correct the record and correct the mistake she made earlier. But no, again, completely. This is why I am just frustrated, I think is the word you used. I'd use stronger words. Because we are led by some very dim leaders, visionless, weak, and we are in an almighty mess. We've got to stop patting ourselves on the back and going, gosh, we're so much better than the rest of the world. We've handled this so much better. No, we haven't. The rest of the world is back or on the way back to normality, whilst we've still got the zero COVID fantasy and have absolutely no roadmap to reopening the country. If the target is 80%, is as Gladys Berejiklian said the other day, well, that's completely unachievable in the short term, in the medium term. To have 80% of the population, that includes young people, children, vaccinated, and it's not what's happening elsewhere in the world that's opening up. They're nowhere near that 80% and they're opening up. So if that's the target we're setting ourselves, then we are going to be locked away from the rest of the world for a considerable amount of time. And the mixed messages, John, from the Chief Health Officers, you played Jeanette Young there, the Queensland Chief Health Officer, saying she doesn't want an 18-year-old Queenslander to die from the vaccine, from a blood clot, because the risk of them dying from COVID is so small for an 18-year-old. Well, the South Australian Chief Health Officer seems to be ignorant of that. I wish those two Chief Health Officers would talk to each other, because the woman who advised footy crowds not to touch the footy if it gets kicked into the crowd, because goodness me, a player with COVID could have touched it. She was asked about the vaccine targets, about, it's unreasonable to expect very young people, healthy people, to be fully vaccinated before we reopen. And she seemed to be upset by that question, by that suggestion. She thought you cannot underplay the risk to young people of COVID. I mean, statistically, that is such a ignorant and alarmist position to have, and completely at odds with Jeanette Young, who seemed to acknowledge in a statement today that an 18-year-old has very little to fear from COVID, unless they've got some sort of immune compromised issue. So I'm just astounded that we have allowed these middle-ranking health bureaucrats to have these dictatorial powers that have completely now crippled the country. We've got 12 million people, John, locked down tonight. 12 million.
Well,
in a country that's got barely any COVID, and we've got one person or two people in intensive care in the whole country.
The other point is, and I've said this before,
the whole country, and 12 million locked down.
We're never going to be able to say again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it in relation to the Constitution. Forget about, who's the head of state. We've got fundamental problems with the way we run our place, in that the federal government is having to plead for things that most of us thought the federal government would have the power to do. The way if you have a pandemic again, are you going to have 7 governments, well, in fact 9, all pulling in different directions? It's possible, isn't it? Possible under the system we've got.
It's bewildering and it's maddening, and I fear that we have no alternatives in this country. I think that's part of the problem. I think the media, to be honest with you, is a huge part of the problem. It has been relentlessly alarmist and hysterical and whipped up so much fear that's unnecessary. And I think 18 months into this, I think so many Australians are completely ignorant about what the fatality rate is, about what the hospitalisation rate is, about what's happening elsewhere in the world. We just hear these doom and gloom. Of course, there's plenty of doom and gloom. People die from this. It can be absolutely deadly if you are over a certain age, if you're immune compromised, if you're morbidly obese. There's no doubt about that. But the risk factors, I think, have been overstated dramatically. People are scared witless. And the other problem we have, other than the media, I think, is where are the voices from politicians challenging any of this? There's just this... there's really no opposition to the current strategy.
I'll give some credit in New South Wales.
We're not having Anthony Albanese come out and say this is crazy. We're not having...
I think John Barilaro has tried to gently push in that direction, maybe not gently, maybe a little more than gently, on a couple of occasions. He's blown the whistle on this farce over... I mean, how about that? Victor Donello, he's out there at a press conference today, and John Barilaro said, what's he doing out there? And as a result of that publicity, they've gone and had another look and said, oh, actually, you shouldn't have been allowed out. Now he's back in. It's just, people are thinking, hello. Can I...
clown world.
Yeah, can I? I love that term, clown world. Can I? Because I want to just hear what Gladys Berejiklian has to say. Take some calls. There's a fascinating piece which I know you want to talk about coming out of the UK on the way they're handling things now with very high levels of vaccination, and they're getting a lot more cases, but the impact of it is quite different to what people might imagine. I want to go through that with you in a moment, but this is what Gladys Berejiklian had to say. This is on people under 60 getting the AstraZeneca. Have a listen.
The New South Wales government always follows the health advice, and the health advice from the federal regulatory bodies is that those over 60 should be getting AstraZeneca. If you've had your first dose of AstraZeneca, you should be getting your second dose, and that's certainly what New South Wales health clinics will be doing. We will accept anybody over 60 that wants AstraZeneca. We'll also accept, of course, anybody getting their second shot. But beyond that, you should talk to your GP. The federal advice is there, and beyond that point, you should talk to your GP.
Yeah, so this is the thing. And you got GPs out there. I mean, you got the AMA's critical of the government, and you've got GPs like Dr. Ross Walker and others who are saying, well, and we had Jamal Riffy on here last night, who's doing vaccinations at Belmore, and they're saying, well, come in, you have a chat to you, and we'll give you the AstraZeneca. And people as young as 18 have been ringing the station today saying they've been getting it. So, look, we'll take a break. We'll come back, take the calls, and Rita, I want you to go through with you some of this information coming out of the UK. So it is fascinating the way it's happening there, where I was watching last night. Will there be any crowds at the AFL? We're talking about not staging the State of Origin 3 in Sydney because it can't be safely staged. I saw a completely packed Wembley Stadium last night where England's played Germany.
It's depressing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that in a moment. 131873 is the number, 22 and a half minutes past 8. 131873, Rita Panahy's here on this Wednesday night. What's the clown world? What did you call it? Clown land? Is that the term?
Clown world. That's where we are right now. We are ruled by clowns, and I think it's high time we started to engage some critical thinking and started asking some pertinent questions.
I love that. Look, we've got lots of people want to have their say. I'll just go to Colin, who's called in. Hello, Colin.
Hey, John and Rita. I love your work, Rita. I'm a big fan of yours. Listen, John, a couple of weeks ago, I sent you a text message off the back of that Chief Medical Officer from South Australia, and I made the comparison that these three Chief Medical Officers from South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, all looked very similar to a cartoon character. Do you remember that?
I think so. I'm not. You're talking The Simpsons. I'm not a huge Simpsons person, but I'm. You're talking about some sort of cat lady that was part of The Simpsons. Is that right?
Yeah, the crazy cat. The crazy cat lady.
Yeah, I've got. Hey, Joel's got a bit. Is this her?
You can't say that.
Is that the crazy cat lady? Do it again.
Yeah. It's not looking.
Is this offensive? Are we going to be in trouble?
Cool. You can't say that.
We have now.
I thought you were going to say Dr. Nick, but I do know the character you're talking about. I haven't watched The Simpsons for many years, but it is actually one of my very favourite gifs. Yep. Is that what the kids call it? The gifs? It's the that she throws the cats at Lisa.
Okay.
Which
all right.
It is a very amusing,
good on you, Colin.
But no, we can't say that.
Before we get ourselves into further trouble, thank you very much for that, and thank you, Joel, for finding the crazy cat lady. Okay, Harold, hello.
Yeah, mate. What I want to say to you, John and Rita. Sorry, my English is not.
No, it's pretty good. Sounds good to me. Go on.
Okay. All right. All this fighting, confused or whatever is it comes from the federal government. Since the time they changed that from 50 to 60, there the problems start. They should have just leave it. They should have just leave it to 50. I took my first AstraZeneca from my GP. I went to my GP. He's a very good GP. As he advised me to take it, I'm going to go for the second on the 7th next month. Okay? There is no way they should have changed it to 60 or whatever, then they bring it back again. It's like you go to Afghanistan for war. You take a soldier, you put them into the ship or whatever.
Yep.
They start fighting, and then you bring them back. You go tell them, no, stop the fighting, go back.
Yeah, all right, mate. Thank you very much. The point there is, I think the change. This is the thing. The inconsistency is the problem, isn't it?
I think the problem is before that. To be honest with you, I think even before, as soon as they started putting a question mark over AstraZeneca, they undermined the vaccination message and put doubts in people's mind. I know a lot of people who were around that 50 age group and they didn't want to have AstraZeneca because they were just over the threshold and they wanted Pfizer. Now they can get Pfizer, those who waited, and I think that's part of the problem. I think the health bureaucrats have done the most damage to the vaccination message and undermined the AstraZeneca vaccine by putting these conditions on it, by putting these warnings. I'm sure, of course, make people aware of the risk, but we're talking about, what is it, 1 in 2 million chance of dying from a blood clot? It is a pretty tiny, minuscule risk. So
it's not big. No, it's not.
To
it's not at all.
keep changing the parameters of who qualifies for what. I think anyone who wants a vaccine should be able to get it. So if you want, if you're 20 and you speak to your GP and you want to get vaccinated straight away rather than wait for Pfizer, go right ahead. And that's what you can do now.
Yep. Well, that's
if
what
you're
Jeanette Young should have been saying.
In an age group where you're supposed to have AstraZeneca, but you prefer Pfizer, go for it.
Yep. Yep. But, I think that's been undermined now because the whole country's watching and they're hearing these different health officers, and they're thinking, hello, 131873 is the number. Can we go to Mark, who's in Brisbane? Hello, Mark.
Evening, John. Evening, Rita. Look, the first thing I'd like to say is the television media, the news, have got a bit to answer for because they sensationalise everything. It's a catastrophic situation and horrendous bloody reactions and that makes people worry. They should just report the damn news, not sensationalise it. But the other thing I want to say is I worked for Telstra for 40 years and I went to several seminars where they said, if somebody's got a fault, I worked in maintenance. If somebody's got a fault, you don't go along and say, oh, that's the fault of the guy who did the installation or that's the fault of the last guy that was here. Customer doesn't want to know whose fault it is. Customer wants to know who's going to fix it, when they're going to fix it, and how they're going to fix it.
Yep.
Now, they just had a national meeting, didn't they, all the premiers and the federal government?
Yeah, last night. Oh,
Why
Monday
don't
night.
they come out with a united point? So this is it, and we all agree, instead of, the federal government saying one thing and then all the state governments criticising them. Our government here in Queensland is a bunch of
be careful, mate.
All right.
All right. Good on you,
Sorry,
mate.
Go on.
All right, that's all right, mate. Listen, Mark, you know what? It's interesting Mark says that. You've spoken in a very forthright way and you're 100% right because on Monday night we were on air here with Peter Credlin as Scott Morrison was detailing what he was saying and there were significant moves have been made at the National Cabinet. I did make the point that, look, this is what's happening, that's what's happening, that's what's happening. And we did make the point with Peter that often these things, you need to look at it in the context of what the states might say because they're all involved. And in the next 24 hours was all undermined and unravelled. So, this... Look, can I also just mention, can we look at London? Because I mentioned Wembley Stadium last night. Now, they had a full house there. It was rollicking. England beat Germany in the soccer. It was a historic night. Someone sends me a text message here, and it's an interesting point because they've had, and I think the number there is on Monday, they had 23,000 new infections in the UK, 23,000, where they've got high levels of vaccination. 23,000 new infections. That crowd was in there. Someone's saying here, William, Kate and George, they were maskless. Well, the whole crowd, no one was wearing a mask. I couldn't see anyone wearing any sort of a mask at all.
Why should they be wearing masks? They're all, George is a child.
Yeah, but
so
you know
George
what I mean. They're all
from...
sitting in a crowd together. They've all gone in there.
Good.
And this is the point of this story that I think you wanted to highlight, where they've got these high levels of infections, but because they've got very high levels of vaccination there, and people are getting infected, but there's much lower levels of hospitalisations and a significantly lower number of deaths. That's the point, isn't it? And lower number of deaths from this as opposed to flu and some of the other conditions.
Again, Scott Morrison was keen to point out, there's 100 deaths every week in Britain, and we can't possibly, he won't have that happening in Australia. I mean, that in itself is fairly an inaccurate statement. We don't have their population to begin with, but you are got 13 times more deaths right now in England and Wales from the flu and pneumonia than you have from COVID. So, again, that is another indication that the vaccine works because they still do have a lot of infection and COVID in the community.
Yep.
And again, we keep hearing about the Delta variant. It's more infectious. It's so much more dangerous. It's more virulent. Well, it's not. It's not more virulent. It is more infectious.
It's more
That's
infectious.
absolutely
yeah, that's
right.
Yeah.
But Professor Greg Dorr has pointed out, and if I could quote him directly, he's an infectious diseases expert, he said, there is no evidence that Delta variant is more virulent than other variants. In fact, data from the UK shows that death rate from Alpha, which is the original variant, is 2% compared to 0.3% for the Delta variant. Yep. So again, we need to, this is what I was mentioning earlier about we are inundated with COVID information. It leads the news every night. It's just saturation coverage, but there's so much that isn't shared that's important. How many people in Australia would know that? We all know how bad Delta is. Sydney's in lockdown because of Delta. But how many know it's actually, yes, more infectious, but less deadly than the other strain? Yep. That's a fairly important fact, I would have thought, a fairly basic fact that we should be made aware of. Just the same as we should be made aware of how many people are actually in hospital with COVID. Last I checked, which was earlier today, there was a total of 8 in all of New South Wales, and I believe 2 were in intensive care. 1 or 2 were in intensive care. The rest were just in general wards. So, again, I would have thought that's a fairly important bit of data to be aware of when you've got millions of people locked down. And it seems that sort of stuff isn't of interest to many who just whip up the fear and the hysteria and have got people scared silly. I've been driving around parts of New South Wales today that aren't in lockdown and seeing mums in the car, got the baby in the seat at the back, and they're wearing a mask whilst they're driving in the car, in their own car. What is going on? I mean, is that you would only do that if you genuinely fear that if you take your mask off and breathe freely in your own car, you're at some increased risk of COVID.
Yep. Yeah.
In country New South Wales, in an area that is not even locked down, has no cases.
Yeah, look, exactly, and I think, look, I've actually found myself a couple of times because you leave the supermarket, get in the car, and you're driving for and you think, hang on, I'm wearing a mask. You forget to take it off. So look. Can I say? Wayne says here, we can say this. The sad thing about Wembley last night, the English supporters did mention the war. That's what he's saying. So I think they might have also. Yeah. Let's take a break. 131873 is the number. We'll get to all of your calls and texts in a moment. Rita Panahy's here with us for another 25 minutes or so. We've got car advice coming up after the news at the top of the hour, 22 and a half minutes to 9. 131873 is our number. Rita Panahy's here with us. Rita, are you on? Are we able to? Because we're all broadcasting remotely, aren't we, at the moment? Is that right? Are you locked down?
I'm very remote. I'm somewhere between Orange and Wagga Wagga. I actually couldn't tell you where I am, to be honest with you. I'm on the some rest area on the road, but I was in the most delightful part of New South Wales for the last few days, Port Stephens. My goodness, I've never been there, spent any time there previously.
Lovely part of the world.
What just a charming, gorgeous part of the world. But I tell you, the businesses are really suffering around the Hunter Valley, the Hunter. You'd go to these wonderful restaurants or you'd go surfing on the sand dunes, one of the activities you can do there. There's no tourists, there's nobody, obviously, because they rely on the areas that are locked down to come into those areas. And with obviously no interstate tourists and no Sydney-siders coming up, they're really feeling it. It's we can't forget that people who aren't locked down, businesses are also hurting.
Yes.
Because of the lockdown.
Yeah, I was talking to a business today and they're doing takeaway. And look, a lot of their business is takeaway, but they've had a significant drop. And then you've got other businesses you go past, they've got the closed sign up. And so the staff are, the staff have to be looked after. There's no revenue coming through. If they're food businesses, it happens pretty quickly. Suddenly stuff that you've got there is going to spoil. There's all this has been, but you've heard this. Of course, it's happened in Victoria 4 times. Happened all over the country. So, 131873. You go.
It's going to keep happening because we have no plan. The only plan I've heard is from Gladys Berejiklian, which was really just a promise to have a chat about a plan once we're 80% vaccinated. Shouldn't we be having that chat now? Shouldn't we be having a plan, a date, a target, and once we hit this target, we open, maybe that will actually give people an incentive to go and get vaccinated if they're not in a high-risk category. But right now, we are so behind the rest of the world in terms of getting to some normality and reopening the country.
And wouldn't you stand up? Look, 85%...
And we were ahead. We were the poster child. We were the best at one point.
85% of all adults in the UK have been given one dose and 62% the full two. Now, wouldn't you today say, hey, listen, in the UK it's 85%, they're 62% fully, and then hold up a picture of Wembley Stadium and say, this is what they can do with that level of vaccination. Let's ramp it up, get out there. This is what we're aiming for, so people then have some idea of what you can aim for. You're 100% right. George is on the line. Hello, George. You're going. Sorry, you go, Rita, go.
You look at the examples in the US, because I think that is so informative to see how some states handle it compared to others. Florida, Texas opened up months ago, and the death rates, hospitalisation rates have plummeted because they targeted the at-risk categories, got them vaccinated and reopened. Nowhere near 80% fully vaccinated, not even close when they reopened. But it worked. And even New York, which was one of the most lockdown states, the worst responses we've seen, enormous death rate, they're open. Springsteen played, big crowd, no masks.
Yep.
And here we are, shutting down people trying to earn a living.
Yep. I'll go to George, who's in Cherrybrook. Hello, George.
Evening, John and Rita. Just on the AstraZeneca vaccine and all the fear that's built up in the community about it, I think this point hasn't been publicised nearly enough, but the two little words that build up all that fear are blood clots. Now, they're not terminal. It's not the end of the world. It's not a death sentence. It is curable. I believe that the odds of getting blood clots are something like 1 in about 1 million. I think I don't know exactly.
It's 3 in 100,000, which is 0.0003%. And then for a serious blood clot, it's 3% of that. So you can. Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
And I believe that the number of people in this country that have been hospitalised with blood clots is around about 40. And of those 40, one has died. The other 39 have been discharged from hospital.
Yep.
So, I think that the reason that people are so frightened of AstraZeneca, I've had the first dose and I'm due to have the second one in a week's time, is because they think that blood clots is an instant death sentence.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's curable.
Yeah.
And those figures prove it. So I think that point should be publicised more by the government.
You've done that, George, very well, and good luck with your second jab. I'm having mine end of July. And look, we'll have Dr. Ross Walker on the program. I think he's been doing a bit, but we'll have him on as our guest in this talkback hour tomorrow night to talk not just about that, but about a whole range of things. He'll be with us tomorrow night. Rita, I mentioned earlier John Barilaro. He's in lockdown, and he blew the whistle today on his own government. He attacked his own fellow minister, saying, what's doing with Victor Dominello being out and about? I thought he was supposed to be a close contact, and he got into a bit of trouble. He's plain speaking, John Barilaro. And then Health Department, after Barilaro's outburst, has come out and apologised. So when he got it wrong, he's been sent back into isolation. And he's been on with Alan Jones in the last half hour, John Barilaro, from isolation. I thought you should hear this. Have a listen.
How can people, Deputy Premier, take all you lot seriously?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. And tonight, the news just now that Victor Dominello has been reclassified as a close contact again in itself makes you wonder. And, I've made comments today which hasn't pleased some of my colleagues, but, I'm not going to stand aside and pretend that these inconsistencies are acceptable. And I've called it out, and the public has every right to know.
Yeah, there you go. So that's John Barilaro speaking. And I just want to go to Douglas, who's called in, Rita. Douglas is in Paddington, which is just in the eastern part of Sydney. Hello, Douglas.
Good evening, John. How are you, mate?
Good. What are you going to tell us, Douglas?
Mate, I'm just sitting here relaxing today and feeling unbelievable. Today we handed in the keys back to a shop in the city. Unbelievable. The feeling to be out is unbelievable.
Well, you had a shop in the city?
Yes, it's been there for 50 years in Elizabeth Street, the shoe shop. The doors are shut, and she's cleaned up, and the landlord's got the keys.
And that's
We're
it.
out, finished. $250,000 worth of rent for the next 2 years is no longer hanging over your head.
Yeah.
The city's broke. They've broke its back.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going to go. I have no solution.
Yep.
But the people that are there now are trapped. They are in trouble. There's no question about it.
All right, and you're out.
We're out.
And celebrating. All right. So
Yeah.
so how long have you struggled for? Because with what's happened, the CBD's been pretty dead, hasn't it? I know it's not quite as dead as Melbourne, but it's been pretty dead for a long time now, hasn't it?
It's been dead for a few years, which is CBD. For it's just dying completely. And it's going to get worse. Clover Moore's not finished with it yet.
Yeah.
This is only the beginning.
Yeah. All right,
It's
mate.
only the beginning.
All right. Well, enjoy your night. There you go. How many stories would there be like that, Rita, of people who've just got to the end and they can't keep going and they've had to close their business?
Oh, and you can blame them. It's not just what they've suffered thus far. It's the fact that there's no end to it. Could this go on for another 12 months,
Yep.
24 months?
Yep.
With the current... we've got no cost-benefit analysis, it seems, in this country. We are going to be, even once we're 70, 80% vaccinated,
Yep.
there's going to be some COVID in the community. It is going to be endemic. That's what the expert advice has told us for more than 12 months. So if you have no tolerance for it in the community, if you're going to lock down with a few cases, then we're never going to have any certainty. We're never going to have free travel. We're not going to have people coming here because no one's going to be submitting to quarantine who wants to come here for a holiday. That is a fantasy. No one's doing that.
Yep.
And you look a couple of years ago, 2019, I think we can all remember it, we had 900 deaths from the flu. And yet that didn't lead the news every night. We didn't have lockdowns. We didn't limit people's movement. The reaction to this seems to be so completely disproportionate to the risk and to the cost. This isn't just an economic cost, John, as you know. It's a human cost. We've got people who are missing cancer screenings. We've got people whose mental health is absolutely being destroyed. People's livelihoods. At some point, I just hope some sanity prevails with this country's response.
All right,
but the majority, I've got to say, seem to be pretty happy with this alarmist response.
Let's take another break. The one thing is you do have people who now know what's going on elsewhere. Trev says, my cousin in Stuttgart, Germany, fully vaccinated. Most are. She's out normally shopping, doing everything. It's life is normal. So that's what's happening in other parts of the world there where they're still having cases in large numbers. 131873 is the number.
I don't think most people do know that, John. I think most people, when you talk about what we're doing, say, well, what about India? What about the UK? They bring up these horror scenarios. India, never mind that it's a third world country with a health system that's completely inadequate. Their COVID rates have absolutely plummeted. Have you seen the curve of their COVID infections? And the experts can't even explain why it's plummeted.
131873 is the number. It's 9 to 9 now. With Rita Panahi here, just a final call. Nigel, what did you want to say?
Hi, I'm a Sydney medical specialist. I'd just like to point out to people, despite us supposedly being the worst in the OECD because we've only given 2 doses to 4%, while New Zealand's given 8% 2 doses.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we've given 1 dose to 22% versus their 5%.
Right,
so we've actually got 26% of people with at least 1 dose.
Mm.
They've only got 13% of people with at least 1 dose, half as many as us.
Okay.
It's only because of the delay from the AstraZeneca, because of the 12-week delay. We only just started giving second dose. So it's completely misleading. It's like basically having Usain Bolt, giving him a 50-metre handicap and then deciding the race is over when he's just about to start. It's ridiculous.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Nigel. And look, I've had my first dose, but I've got to wait till the end of July. But Rita, from what I can understand, you can do it after 8 weeks. And in some areas, they've sped it up. And if it's available and there's someone there, they can give it to you. I've thought about trying to get it earlier. I don't know whether that's going to make a difference, but I'll talk to a doctor about that. So we'll see. I've got no problem. I might try and make it 8 weeks, and then I'll be able to be double vaccinated. Thank you for that call, Nigel. Rita, that's about it. You sound like you're just about at the end of your tether.
I am about to just check myself into a clinic or just get into the fetal position until sanity prevails, and then I can come out again. Because
all right.
I can't cope anymore, John. I just can't.
Okay, well, you're going to be, ironically, you're going to be back into the freest state in the country soon, Victoria. Who would have thought that?
Well, kind of, yeah. Well, until we find one case, and then we'll all be locked down again for a...
Yep.
Don't start. Did South Australia really impose restrictions with 0 cases?
Yep.
Did that happen this week? In all the madness,
yeah, that's right.
I almost
that's
missed
true.
that.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. That is true. All right, that's it for tonight. Thank you, Rita. We'll talk to you next week and see you on television very, very soon. Thank you.